Welcome to the Baboom Baboom podcast, your go-to source for expert tips on car stereo installation, vehicle wiring, and all things wiring related. Whether you're a seasoned pro or just getting started, we've got the advice to help you power up your ride. Get ready to crank up the volume on your knowledge and make your next wiring project a success.
All right, let's dive into something that might not seem super exciting, but trust me, it's the heart of any good trailer adventure. Trailer wiring. We've got some excerpts here from a popular FAQ guide, so we're going to tackle those questions everybody has and, maybe debunk some myths while we're at it.
Myths. Now that you mention it, yeah, there are a lot of myths. What kind of myths are we talking about here?
The things you think you know about trailer wiring, but could get you into trouble on the road. Connectors, color codes, the whole shebang.
I see what you're getting at. I'm surprised, actually, how many times people assume things about trailer wiring, and they end up in a pretty dangerous situation.
Exactly. Let's start with those connectors. Seems like there are tons of them out there. 4-pin, 5-pin, 6-pin, even 7-pin. Why, so many choices. It's like picking a phone charger, but with much higher stakes.
It really comes down to what you need for your trailer. You wouldn't use dial-up to stream a movie, right?
Yeah, not in 2025.
Same idea here.
Okay, so a basic 4-pin is like our dial-up, gets the signal out there. But what if I've got like a full-on camper? Would that work?
No way! You'd be overloading it. Blown fuses, overheating, maybe even a fire hazard. Imagine running your camper's AC and microwave on a little 4-pin connector. Not a good idea.
I could see how that would be bad. So for a fancy setup like that, I'd need more pins, like a 6-pin or a 7-pin?
Right. Those extra pins have separate circuits for things like electric brakes, auxiliary power, even battery charging. So yeah, it's important to have what you need for all the electrical stuff your trailer is using.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like upgrading to high-speed internet for your trailer. But even with the right connector, there are still all those wires. How do you know which one goes where?
That's where the color code comes in. It's kind of the universal language for trailer wiring.
Like a roadmap through the wiring jungle.
Exactly. White is for ground, brown is for taillights, yellow and green are for turn signals and brakes.
Wait, yellow and green for brakes?
Yep. Yellow is left turn and brake, green is right turn and brake. It lets other drivers know if you're turning or stopping.
Ah, so it's not just stopping, it's communication. What about the other colors?
Blue is for electric brakes. Red or black is for auxiliary power. Stuff like interior lights, a winch, charging another battery.
It's like a rainbow of safety and cool features, but I feel like there's a but coming.
You're right. This color code is generally standard, but there can be some differences. It depends on who made the trailer or if anyone's done custom wiring. Always double check the wiring diagram before you start messing around.
Super important point. Safety first, right? So connectors, color codes, all checked off. What else do we absolutely need to know to become trailer wiring masters?
Okay, now we need to talk about wire gauge, which is, well, basically how thick the wires are. People overlook this a lot, but it's huge for safety. Think of it this way. You wouldn't try to put out a house fire with a garden hose.
Okay, I'm seeing the analogy.
Yeah.
Like garden hose for small jobs, fire hose for big ones.
Right. Wire gauge is about matching the wire to how much electricity it needs to carry. A thicker wire, which has a lower gauge number, can handle more current without overheating. Thinner wire is fine for smaller circuits that don't need as much power.
So we're preventing electrical meltdowns, right?
Exactly. Wrong gauge, and you risk blown fuses, damaged wires, even a fire. And we definitely don't want that. We need to make sure the electricity can flow safely and smoothly.
For sure. So how do we know what gauge to use for what? Any rules of thumb?
Well, there are some general guidelines, but you should always check the diagram for your trailer and any codes or standards. For heavy-duty things like the main power, battery charging, or electric brakes, you'd want a thicker wire, like 10 gauge.
10 gauge for the heavy hitters.
Yeah.
Got it. What about lights and signals, the more common stuff?
Usually you can go down to 12 gauge for running lights, brake lights, and some auxiliary power, and then 14 gauge for turn signals and taillights.
So thicker for the big jobs, thinner for the smaller ones. Makes sense. But what happens if, even after all this, those trailer lights just decide they're not working? We'll be back in a bit to talk about troubleshooting, but first, I want you to think about this. Have you ever had a trailer wiring problem that just left you scratching your head? We'll be right back to help you become a trailer wiring detective. Okay, we're back. Time to put on our detective hats, I guess. What do we do when those trailer lights just won't work? It's like they have a mind of their own sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. But usually, a little detective work can get them working again.
Lead the way, Sherlock. What's our first clue?
Well, it's usually the connections. A loose connection or one that's corroded can really mess things up. You get resistance in the circuit, and then you get all sorts of problems like dim lights or flickering. Maybe they even just go out completely.
So before we panic, we check all those connections. What else?
Yeah, the ground connection. That ground wire is super important. It lets the electricity flow back to the source to complete the circuit. And if that path is interrupted, things get weird.
It's like a broken link in a chain then.
Exactly. And you could get all kinds of symptoms, like the lights might be dim or they flicker. Maybe your brakes aren't working right or you blow a fuse. So checking the ground connection is always a good place to start. Make sure it's clean and tight, no corrosion.
So connections first, then ground. Got it. What if we're still in the dark, so to speak?
Okay, then we look at the wires themselves. Go over them really carefully. You're looking for any damage, like cuts or places where the wire is exposed. Even a tiny cut can stop the electricity from flowing properly.
Right. If we find a bad spot, we cut it out, put in a new piece, and make sure it's well insulated. Yeah, thinking about those long drives, especially on bumpy roads, it seems like there are lots of chances for things to go wrong. Is there anything we can do to make that wiring tougher?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where upgrades can really make a difference. Like a better wiring harness or even a junction box can make troubleshooting so much easier. And then there are LED lights. Those last way longer and they're easier to see.
So it's about being proactive and investing in quality. Smart. But some of those upgrades, well, they might seem a little intimidating if you're not super comfortable with electrical stuff. Any advice for the DIYers out there?
Yeah, don't be afraid to call in a pro. Find a good trailer mechanic or electrician. They can walk you through the process, make sure everything is done right, and even give you advice on what would work best for your setup.
So it's okay to get expert help.
Definitely. There's no shame in that, especially when it comes to something as important as safety. Okay, now let's dive into some of those upgrades I mentioned.
Okay, let's trick out my trailer wiring. What should I do first?
Well, a lot of people like to switch from the 4 or 5 pin connector to a 7-pin connector. It's kind of like upgrading from a standard definition TV to a high definition one.
7 pins. That sounds serious. What kind of cool stuff can I do with that?
Oh, all sorts of things. You can have separate circuits for your electric brakes, auxiliary power, and even a charging circuit to keep your trailer's battery topped off.
So it's like upgrading my trailer to first class. No more dead battery when I get to the campsite.
Right, exactly. And sometimes an upgrade means replacing old stuff.
You mean like those old wires that have seen better days?
Yeah, exactly. Over time, wires can get brittle, corrode, or just plain wear out. Putting in new high-quality wiring can really improve reliability and safety, especially if you're doing other upgrades too.
It's like giving your trailer's wiring a spa day. I can see how that would give you some peace of mind. What about keeping things organized? All those wires can get pretty messy.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. That's where a junction box can really help. It's basically a central point for all your trailer's wiring, kind of like the brain of the operation.
A junction box? Is that like the electrical panel in a house?
Yeah, it is. It keeps everything neat and tidy, which makes troubleshooting way easier. Plus, if you want to add more features later on, it's easy.
It's like having a control center for your trailer's wiring. Very cool. What about the lights themselves? Are there any upgrades I should know about?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Switching from regular lights to LEDs is a big one these days. LEDs are brighter, they last longer, and they don't use as much power.
I've heard good things about LEDs. They're supposed to make a big difference in how visible you are, especially at night.
Oh, yeah, for sure. They give you a sharper, more focused light so other drivers can see you better. And since they don't use much power, they're easier on your battery.
So they're good for safety and for saving money. I like that. Say I'm really worried about safety and I want to be prepared for anything. Are there any upgrades that could help with that?
Well, if you want the ultimate peace of mind, you could install a breakaway battery system.
Whoa, breakaway battery system. That sounds pretty serious. What does it do?
Basically, it's a separate battery and braking system that's not connected to your tow vehicle. So if your trailer ever detaches from your vehicle, that system automatically activates the brakes and stops the trailer.
That's amazing. It's like an emergency backup. So now I've got upgraded connectors, high-quality wiring, a junction box, LED lights, and even a breakaway battery system. Is that everything I need to upgrade my trailer wiring?
Yeah, with all that, you're pretty much set. You've got a really solid and safe electrical system.
I feel like I'm ready for anything.
Need top-quality electrical wire? Baboom's got you covered. Get your 6-pack today. Each combo comes in 6 different colors and a total of 600 feet of wire. Perfect for any project, and you won't find a better price in the industry. Head over to baboom.com now to snag yours. That's baboom.com.
It's cool how a few upgrades can make such a big difference.
You're right. It's about knowing what you need, doing your research, and making good choices. And of course, always thinking about safety.
Speaking of safety, we've talked about preventing problems and upgrading things. But what if, even after all that, something still goes wrong with my trailer wiring on a trip?
You're right. That can happen. It can be really frustrating, but often you can figure it out yourself and fix it.
Okay, tell me more. What are some of those common problems we might run into on the road?
Well, one of the most common is when your trailer lights are dim or they flicker. It's almost like they're trying to send you a message.
Oh yeah, I've been there. What's the first thing I should check when that happens?
First thing, as always, check those connections. Remember, a loose or corroded connection can create resistance and cause problems like dim lights.
Okay, I make sure those connections are clean, tight, and secure. What's next on the checklist?
The ground connection, of course, that's so important. If the ground wire is loose or damaged or corroded, it can cause all sorts of weird electrical issues, including those dim or flickering lights.
So a bad ground can really mess things up. Okay, we've checked the connections and the ground. What if those lights are still acting up?
Then we move on to the wires themselves. Look them over really carefully for any signs of damage, like look for cuts, places where the insulation's worn away, anything like that. Even a small cut can mess up the flow of electricity.
So we put on our detective hats and search those wires for anything suspicious. And if we find a damaged wire, we know what to do. Cut out the bad section, splice in a new piece, and make sure it's properly insulated. What if it's more than just the lights? Like, what if the brakes are acting up?
Yeah, if your trailer brakes aren't working right, that's a whole other issue. Definitely something you need to investigate.
So what do I do first when the brakes start giving me trouble?
Start with the brake controller. That's usually installed in your tow vehicle, and it tells your trailer brakes when to engage and how hard. So make sure it's installed correctly and that it's working right. Usually there are some tests you can run on it to make sure it's sending the right signals.
Okay, check the brake controller. What else should I look at?
Then check the wiring that goes from the controller to the brakes. Just like with the lights, look for any signs of damage, loose connections, corrosion, things like that. Pay extra attention to the area around your trailer's axles. That's where wiring often gets snagged or damaged because of stuff on the road or just from vibration.
Right, got it. And if I have electric brakes, should I also check those magnets and drums?
Absolutely. Over time, those magnets can wear out and the drums can get scored, which means your brakes won't work as well. If you're comfortable with a bit of mechanical work, you can check those yourself. Otherwise, it's probably best to have a mechanic take a look.
Always good to be safe. Okay, so we've covered dim lights and brake problems. Are there any other common wiring problems I should be ready for?
Oh yeah, there's one that can be really confusing. When your trailer just completely loses power, like you hook everything up, you do your checks, and nothing, no lights, no brakes, nothing works.
Talk about a major bummer. What could cause that?
Well, sometimes the simplest solution is the right one. Make sure that trailer plug is really seated well in the receptacle on your tow vehicle. Sometimes it's just loose or the locking mechanism isn't all the way engaged.
It never hurts to double check the simple things first. But what if the plug is in all the way and I'm still not getting any power?
Okay, then check your fuses. Both your tow vehicle and your trailer have fuses to protect the electrical systems. A blown fuse could definitely be the culprit.
So it's time to dust off those owner's manuals and find those fuse boxes.
Exactly. And always replace a blown fuse with a new one that has the same amperage rating. Don't try to use a different fuse that could cause more problems.
Right, safety first. So I've checked the plug connection, I've looked at the fuses. Anything else I should think about when the power goes out like that?
Remember that ground connection we talked about? Make sure it's still good. If the ground wire is disconnected or isn't making contact, it can stop power from getting to the trailer.
That ground wire is important. Always good to double check. So loose connections, blown fuses, and a bad ground. Those seem to be the most common culprits for trailer wiring trouble.
You got it. They cause most of the electrical problems people have with their trailers.
Thinking back to the upgrades we talked about, it seems like a good 7-pin connector, a junction box to keep everything organized, and high-quality wiring can really help prevent those problems.
Definitely. Like they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Now, say I've checked all the usual things, connections, ground, fuses, and I still can't figure out why my trailer wiring isn't working. Is it time to give up and call in the professionals?
Yeah, that might be a good idea. Sometimes it's best to leave it to the experts, especially when we're talking about electricity. You're right, things can go wrong.
No, yeah, definitely.
But, a lot of times you can fix it yourself if you know what to look for.
Okay, good. So what are some of the things that, most often go wrong with trailer wiring when you're actually out on the road?
One of the most common things is that the lights on your trailer, they're either really dim or they might be flickering.
Yeah, I've seen that happen. What's the first thing to check when that happens?
The first thing is always the same. You got to check those connections. If a connection is loose or if it's corroded, you get that resistance. And then you get dim lights or flickering lights.
Right. Okay, so I'll make sure all the connections are clean and tight and everything. What's next?
Well, next, you got to check the ground connection. A solid ground is super important for the whole electrical system. If that ground wire is loose or corroded or damaged, it can really cause all sorts of weird problems like, dim lights, flickering lights.
A bad ground can really cause a lot of problems. Okay, so we've checked the connections, we've checked the ground. What if the lights are still acting weird?
Okay, if that's happening, then you need to actually look at the wires. Look for any signs of damage. Maybe there's a cut somewhere or the insulation's worn away. Even a small cut or something can interrupt the flow of electricity.
Right. Okay, so we're inspecting the wires really carefully. And if we find a damaged wire, we cut out the bad section, we put in a new piece, and we make sure it's properly insulated. What if it's something bigger than just the lights? Like, what if the brakes aren't working right?
Yeah, if your trailer brakes aren't working right, that's something you definitely need to take a look at.
Yeah, for sure. So where do I start when the brakes are giving me trouble?
Okay, first thing, you want to check the brake controller. That's usually installed in your tow vehicle. It tells the trailer brakes when to come on and how hard they should be braking. Make sure it's installed correctly and that it's working. Usually, there are some tests you can run on it to make sure it's sending the right signals to the brakes.
Okay, so check the brake controller. Got it. What else?
Next thing, you'd look at the wiring that goes from that controller to the brakes. Just like with the lights, look for any damage or loose connections or corrosion. Pay extra attention to the area around your trailer axles because that wiring can sometimes get snagged or damaged.
Yeah, because of rocks and stuff on the road, right?
Right, exactly. Or just from vibration.
Right. Okay, so if I have electric brakes, should I also be checking the magnets and drums?
Oh, yeah. It's a good idea to check those too. Over time, the magnets can wear down and the drums can get all scratched up, and that means your brakes won't be working as well as they should be. If you're okay with doing a little bit of mechanical work, you can probably check those yourself. But, if you're not sure, it's always best to have a mechanic take a look.
Yeah, better safe than sorry. Okay, so we talked about dim lights. We talked about problems with the brakes. Are there any other common trailer wiring problems that I should be ready for?
Well, there's one that can be a real head scratcher. It's when your trailer just completely loses power. You hook everything up, you do all your checks, and nothing. You got no lights, no brakes, nothing's working.
That's no fun. What would cause something like that?
Believe it or not, it can be something really simple. Just make sure that your trailer plug is pushed all the way into the receptacle on your tow vehicle. Sometimes it can come loose, or maybe that locking mechanism isn't fully engaged.
All right. Yeah, always good to check the obvious things first. But what if the plug's in all the way and it's still not working?
Okay, then check your fuses. Both your tow vehicle and the trailer itself have fuses to protect the electrical system. It's possible one of those fuses has blown.
Okay, so I need to find those fuse boxes.
Yep. And always replace a blown fuse with a new one that has the same amperage rating. Don't try to use a different fuse because that can cause more problems.
Right. Safety first. So I've checked the plug, I've looked at the fuses. Is there anything else I should check when the trailer has no power?
You know what? Make sure that ground connection's still good. If that ground wire is disconnected or it's not making good contact, it can stop the power from getting to your trailer's electrical system.
That ground connection is
Yeah.
so important. Always good to double check. So loose connections, blown fuses, and a bad ground, those seem to be the biggest troublemakers when it comes to trailer wiring.
Yeah, you got it. Those are the things that cause most of the problems.
Thinking back to those upgrades we talked about, it seems like having a good 7-pin connector and a junction box to keep things organized and using high-quality wiring, all that stuff, can really help prevent these kinds of problems.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's much easier to prevent a problem than to fix it once it happens.
True that. Now, what if I've checked all the usual things, connections, ground, fuses, and I still can't figure out why my trailer wiring's not working?
Is it time to just call in a professional?
Yeah, sometimes it's best to leave it to the experts, especially when you're dealing with electricity.
Good point. Well, I think we've covered just about every trailer wiring problem you could imagine. Any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
I think we've given everyone a good starting point for understanding their trailer wiring. The more you understand how it works, the more confident you'll be when you hit the road.
And if things get too complicated, it's okay to ask for help.
Absolutely. Safety should always come first. Well, that's it for our deep dive into trailer wiring. We've gone over the basics of connectors and color codes and how to troubleshoot those common problems, and even some cool upgrades you can make.
We talked about how to keep your trailer's electrical system in good shape and how to stay safe. We hope you learned a lot, and remember to keep learning and exploring.
And keep those trailers rolling. Safe travels, everyone.
Need top-quality electrical wire? Baboom's got you covered. Get your 6-pack today. Each combo comes in 6 different colors and a total of 600 feet of wire. Perfect for any project, and you won't find a better price in the industry. Head over to baboom.com now to snag yours. That's baboom.com.